Hello, thanks so much for joining us again on Conversations with Cliff. My name is David Evenden. I'm the owner and founder of Standard User Cyber and Standard User Institute, and this is my good friend Cliff, who is also the president of Standard User Institute. Hey Cliff, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing just fine. How are you doing today?
Oh, pretty good. I'm a little bit backlit because this light is like right above my face, but I'm doing pretty good. Yeah. So thanks again for joining me. I always sort of give a brief little recap of things we've talked about. We've talked about so many things in the last few
Yeah.
weeks
It,
that one of the most recent things that we talked about was identity theft.
hmm
And from what I understand, you're wanting to talk about identity theft and some other types of malicious things that might come out of, let's just say, the deep web or darknet or dark web. It has a bunch of different names, and actually those names describe specific portions of it. But does that sound right?
yes. This is something that I hear from time to time referred to. The dark web, I think, is how I usually hear it termed, and you have some other names for it as well. But it's a mystery to me. And just to be clear right up front, I have no desire to actually go to the dark web and start looking around, but I'm curious about the existence of such a thing. And my wonderings are, I mean, I've seen that, people can go to the dark web, if they want to shop for stolen social security numbers or other things, of that there are things like this available for sale. And I presume, if you want to, you know, terrorist organizations go there to trade, to try to find stuff to buy. And it's just a mystery to me. For one thing, I mean, wouldn't it be dangerous for people to go there? And, I mean, this place, wherever it is, however you get there, I wouldn't think it would be, a mystery to like the NSA. I'm sure they're there looking around. I mean, that's kind of a question. So why don't you just tell me, what does the average person, you know, I don't suppose I need to know anything about it, but I'm curious, and
Sure.
I'm interested. So what can you tell me about the dark web? And I'm sure I'll have other questions as we go along.
Yeah. That I mean, it's a great question. It's a great thought process. Really, I mean, really, when we talk about them in different perspectives, you have the three primary portions of that: dark web, dark net, and deep web. So those are kind of the different portions of that.
Oh, are those three
No, no,
separate
no, no, no.
things?
No, there's not three
All
different ones. It's just
different names.
how, yep, how it's described in different categories. So the dark web, for instance, might be the dark side of the worldwide internet. That might be one way it's described. The dark net, for instance, is actually the physical infrastructure of that dark, web infrastructure. And then the deep web, which actually I just said that. So yeah, so I'm getting mixed up myself.
Okay.
So yeah, so basically deep web and dark web, they're basically kind of the same thing. It's just being described. I mean, it actually, let me say that they are the same thing. They're the exact same thing. They're just basically like terminology used from whatever vantage point you're at. So,
Okay.
and then
Dark web, deep web,
yeah,
basically the same
they're
thing.
basically the same thing. Yep. And
Okay.
so, really, the dark net makes up the web itself, which just physically makes sense. If you think about a spider web, you have a spider web. What makes up a spider web? A series of netting. So the net itself makes up the web. And so you have a dark net. The dark net is the interconnection of specific portions of infrastructure that make up that web. Now, if you're talking about in and of itself, the pronoun itself, for instance, now you're a dark web. Now, let's just say, for instance, and that's what the dark web is. Now, let's just say, for instance, if you're considering the dark web as part of the rest of the internet, now that's where you would describe it as the deep web. It's the deepest part of the internet. it's the same exact portion. It's the same exact thing, just described in different ways depending upon what perspective you're coming from.
Okay, so can I interrupt for just a second? And so, so like my most recent search, is like, how long does it take grass seed to germinate? I assume that's not something you go to the deep web to find out. They have no answers for it. But I'm also assuming that if I put almost any kind of search in my regular Google search engine, I'm not going to say, "Whoops, how did I get here?" I'm in the
Yeah.
deep web. I'm in the dark web.
Yep, and that's a great point. That's a great question. It's a great perspective. So now that we kind of know what makes up the infrastructure, let's talk about how we get to it. So when you initially said your question was, it sounded a little bit like, how does the normal average person access the dark net?
Well, I'm not. It's it's like I'm assuming that ordinary average person doesn't want to,
Right. Yeah.
should
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
doesn't need to.
That's my point. Yeah, is that most people don't like it's not really accessible from the average internet. You have to have a specific browser and access it from that browser.
Okay.
And the most common browser for doing that is called Tor, Tor. You can either have a specific Tor browser, or you can download something like Brave. Brave I like. Brave is actually it's a type of Google Chrome web browser, but it also has a specific tab for accessing the dark web if you wanted to. And so now let's talk about a little bit about how or why people might go to that.
Okay.
So if you were to go in and type something into Google and do a query search, everything in the dark, interconnected in the darknet is not it's not scanned, it's not searched, it's not databased by Google search indexes. It's not indexed, and so you're not going to find any results from the darknet or from the dark web. If you let's just use dark web since we're talking about, you're not going to find any results from the dark web. In order to find results, you have to go to you have to go access that via the specific web browser.
You
Now,
have to access it. Say that your voice kind of went out there.
via that specific web browser.
Okay.
Yeah. So the other side of that, in order to access, again, it's not indexed. In order to access, it's not indexed by anything centralized. In order to, if you scan everything yourself, you can scan all of the infrastructure yourself and see if there's something in there you can access or create your own index. But there's no centralized indexing platform for the dark web. Now, what does that mean? It means that in order to get to something on the dark web, you have to know where it's at. So, so if there's no Google, there's nothing on there that says, hey, I'd like to purchase a person, for instance. You can't scan for that. You have to know, okay, like I've communicated with this person. He says you need to go to this site, and on this site you can access this. Additionally, DNS and IP address routing is a little bit different. So you kind of have to figure out what it is that you're doing, or where you're going, or what you're wanting to access. So that's a little bit more complicated. We won't get into that detail. It doesn't really matter to the average person. So so now kind of stepping into say, okay, let's just say somebody goes here. What is it that they're buying? What are people buying on here anyways? And the only thing that I would say to that is what's been exposed in the news, for instance.
Sometimes at the end of your sentences, you're talking a little softly. Maybe I should turn up my sound, but I think you're getting a little bit soft sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So the only thing that I would talk about there is things that are that have been recently like noted in the news, for instance.
Okay.
So they might sell narcotics, for instance, some type of drugs. If you're looking, for instance, to identify a prostitution ring and you wanted to purchase sex, for instance, or if you are the type of person that needs to be purchasing or selling or trading people, for instance, those are all different types of things you can find up there. Of course you can, there are all kinds of websites for communicating and broadcasting information. ISIS and Al Qaeda sub-organizations have forums on the dark web where they can go and communicate with one another. There's just so much information. There's so much data up there that people use in order to communicate back and forth. There's a lot of hacking related data, of course. If you want to purchase an exploit or you want to purchase a certain type of hack, if you will, you can find it. You can find it there also. You want to purchase a bunch of credit card information, a bunch of social security information. You want to get a new identity. As long as you kind of know what you're doing and how to protect yourself, you can do that there. The one to your point earlier, one of the problems is there are FBI, there are NSA, there are intelligence organizations hiding out, creating their own forums, creating their own platforms. And you go to there and you try to purchase something, it ends up being a sting. So you kind of have to know what's going on or what's happening in order to protect yourself.
Well, if I could just say, I mean, I'm glad to hear that, because I mean, it's, I know that these kinds of activities are happening all over the world all the time, and I mean, I wish they weren't, but they are, and I wish that more of them could be caught and stopped, the illegal and the harmful kinds of activities. But so I'm glad to hear that the NSA and the FBI are there. What you're saying, they are there. They're watching it and looking, because I would think it'd be, even though people are in the deep web, there's still ways to track people through the internet, right?
It's difficult, yeah, because if you want to access that, so really what happens in order to access an infrastructure is you have to stand up your own your Tor node, if you will. And so the way that they're configured, you might have a Tor browser. That Tor browser connects to a specific router that then routes you to everybody else. And then those are stood up and paid for by individuals. So you can go and purchase your own one. I think it's a couple $100,000 in order to actually stand it up so you can have your own access point. Now, everything from that access point that accesses everything else is owned by the person who's purchased it. And unless there's some type of vulnerability that allows law enforcement or somebody else to gain access to that router, you really can't see where that traffic is coming from or who's accessing it. Now, of course, there are ways to hide your IP address and tunnel through multiple layers of VPNs in order to access the Tor node, in order to access the dark net. So there are ways to get around that. And I say that specifically because, let's just say you're a computer at home, you access a Tor node, and that Tor node then goes and accesses something else. Well, I know, hey, from this Tor node, somebody on this website's been accessing this specific, dark web server that's, buying and selling identity or child pornography, for instance. So I want to find out the identity of everybody that's accessing this single Tor node and go investigate them to see if they're the person buying or selling all this child pornography. Well, if you're encapsulating your data or hiding it behind multiple layers of VPNs before you even get to that Tor node, it's going to make it harder to identify where that source is coming from. If you just spin it up yourself and you go and you access that Tor node, and from that Tor node you go and access the dark net, FBI is going to be at your door pretty quick. So, and that's not just like, if I access the dark net, people are going to become knocking on my door. That's not the case. I mean, it's not illegal to access it. It's not illegal to be on there. It's illegal to do illegal things. Yeah.
Well, this is an interesting conversation because I, as an ordinary user, I know very little about computer security. So I'm trying to find ways. I think these conversations are designed to help me and help anyone else who's listening find ways to protect themselves from exploits that might be trying to capture my personal private information.
Yeah.
But it's it's in my mind it's hard not to be exposed to like I'm the kind of person that, if I do anything wrong, I get caught for the most part, and so so I feel like online that, if anybody wanted to catch me in an improper act, it would be pretty easy to find me. So I'm thinking, how on earth do these people evade the police or evade law enforcement and do these um, really bad things?
Yeah.
What
We
I'm hearing from you is that there's all these different layers and there's ways of evading. So that's what makes the need for well-trained cybersecurity professionals really needed.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, and on top of the multiple layers of VPNs and stuff like that, there are all kinds of other ways to do that. But you know, we won't go into those details.
Right, those are probably too advanced. Yeah,
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 okay. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that um, the term you referred, the deep web or the dark web, either one of
yeah,
those.
yeah, yeah. If
It
you, I mean, you of course say those, people will understand what you mean and what you're talking about.
Yeah, but um, you have to. It takes. You're not going to just kind of stumble in there by accident. It's
Right,
something you have to know how to get there, and you have to plan to get there and figure out how to get there. And then even after you get there, there's no Google or something that you can just search for different things to look for. You sort of have to know where you're going.
right. Yep,
But it is a place where people um, trade in lots of kinds of illegal activity.
that's right. Yep, and you know, to your earlier point, you know, you're not going to the dark web to find information about how to um, how to plant soil or plant
Mhm.
crops in soil or whatever. I mean, unless you're planting something illegal, unless it's like, hey, I'd like to know how to properly process this cocaine. You know,
Yeah,
I mean, sure, you can find information like that. How do I build a bomb? How do I do all these different things? Yeah, you
yeah,
can find information like that there.
yeah, yeah. Okay, well, this has been very helpful, and I just, there's obviously this is another one of the world's problems. There's very little I can do about it.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. Well, cool. Well, Cliff, thanks so much for the conversation, and hope you learned something. And we'll talk to you next time.
I have learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Great. Yep. All right. Bye.